In beginning any religion, once the basics of theological theory and belief are understood, newcomers will eventually want to begin their praxis, meaning the material things that you actively do within your faith. For example, Catholic theory will be found within the book, or within the homilia or sermon within the Mass, and then praxis will include daily prayers, partaking in charity to better the community, the socialization found within Mass. The distinction should be pretty straightforward. Theory informs praxis. We have talked at length about certain practices which were done in history and contemporarily, but always in the context of theology in pretty complicated ways. Today is the tangible beginner's guide for newcomers to have something that they can do to get their foot in the door and begin practicing. As always, I urge you to remember the rule of Slavic diversity. I'll try to mention alternative approaches as I go, but bear in mind my mostly Krakowian-informed customs, so it's impossible for me to summarize every method across the Slavic world, and any advice or instruction contained in this video is not the single correct way to approach praxis. It is not an original pan-Slavic praxis, and therefore if you have a particular Slavic region in mind which you want to learn the praxis of, I highly recommend that you just ultimately end up learning that language and seeking out someone from that area who can teach you more. Use this just as a starting point and ultimately branch out on your own. This video is broken into chapters regarding a few of the most essential and most frequently asked about topics for beginners, but it's difficult to know what I need to teach since this is all familiar to me, so if there are any questions that remain unanswered, then please comment them below. If it's simple, then I'll reply right away, and if it's complicated, then I'll be happy to discuss it in a follow-up video. And likewise, this will be hyper-specific to Slavic polytheism. So if you're looking for a more general Western polytheist approach, maybe a Hellenic approach, I'll link a video from a Hellenic or Greek polytheist. It seems pretty different and I don't know anything about it, so, seek out what's most important to what you're looking for. Different boats for different waters. But most importantly, we have to begin with a bit of necessary house cleaning. Most importantly, this is about soul and heart. A clear 90 to 99% of people who seek a religious tradition are doing so in order to fulfill a spiritual need within their heart, a calling from the gods or ancestors to their soul. But sometimes people look into religion for other reasons, maybe to fill into a social clique, maybe since they think their religion's iconography might make good fashion, maybe as an aesthetic interest, maybe as a form of roleplay or a fandom-like obsession with incomplete elements of the faith, or even sometimes out of a desire for powers like magical curses or blessings, without the true context of adhering to the complete religious praxis. And if any of these people are watching, I am obligated to warn you that this religion is not for you, because you will get hurt. To open your soul to the BOGOWIE and your ancestors and all the spirits of the world is to invite such powerful and awesome strangers into your home, to trust a stranger with such power as if trusting them with a gun to your back. If your intentions are insincere, malevolent, or even just foolish and flippant, those spirits which crave the harming of humans will flock to you, and that will be a difficult thing to fix. So for their own safety, I must urge such people to reconsider, to only pursue opening relationships with these old and more powerful and large souls if you're ready to take on the obligation of protecting yourself and maintaining respectful and healthy correspondence with these ancient souls. If you're only interested in fandom or community or artistic expression, then I suggest the Witcher video games and book series. It's very loosely based on Slavic folklore, and it comes with no danger to your souls. Sorry if that felt in any way confrontational, it just needed to be said off the bat. Worship supplies and tools. The best place to start would probably be gathering any materials that you'll need for your praxis, as Slavic religion is very tangible and material, having to do with the souls residing within physical things. So to an extent, you'll need things. And above anything, I suggest ensuring your access to trees. Even without any idols or icons, you can always center yourself and your connection to a deity through natural pieces of their domain. You can always use an oak tree to reach Perun, and the acorns they make are protective. You can use those and leaves and twigs to make basic protective charms. Slavic religion is very naturalistic, and in the past, not all gods were given altars, some only venerated in nature. If you don't have idols, they're absolutely not a necessity, and going straight to natural connections can be a very good strategy. If you don't live out in the countryside like I do, then find someone with a household who you're friends with who would give you access, or even just find a good public park where you can relax alongside whatever tree you might need to contact. Another example, these are the bride and groom trees, which my mother planted after she and my father married. Linden trees are pretty uncommon around our area, so they're both birch trees instead. They give birch milk, which is good for folk medicine, and you can use them to try reaching the bride and groom, who Poles would call łada and ładom. Other associations between trees include willows for the mother Mokosh, as long as you're sure to also offer to the tree herself, because willows and Mokosh have some history with one another. Respect both of them as individuals. You can likewise reach Volos most easily near an alder tree or a fir tree, or any place which feels like a border between two places, near the edge of a marshland, between two fields, anywhere like that. Also, the Rzewolna plant, mullen, or the aspen tree, can be used to reach Rzewolna, or her wild girls, or likewise to keep away her sister Marżona. Young yarrow can be found in fields of crops, or without fields of crops, in wild tall grasses like those along roadsides. Of course, not all plants grow everywhere, but we'll discuss divinatory methods in a later section, and you can always use divination to determine if there's a local plant which will work as a substitute. Turning our attention indoors, if you seek praxis with any of the deities, then it's important to give them an idol or icon to inhabit while they're indoors. Whenever you make prayers to the deities on your altar, you are inviting them to literally step inside the altar or idol which represents them. You are inviting them as literal guests to step into your home, at least for the duration of your prayers. And since money is tight for many of us, I'll give a few options from least to most expensive for things you can use as idols. You can find tarot decks with nice art online for fairly cheap, along with art prints on Etsy or Redbubble, or if you need, you can always save some art and print it off yourself. Flat art works fine enough for the duration of a prayer. The deity can embody the flat icon, it doesn't need to be three-dimensional, and this method is very handy if you're not quite sure which deity you're contacting, since you can just switch between a few artworks to see which ones work the most strongly. Natural embodiments are very common. Here is the chicken stone I keep on my altar, which is a sort of symbol of Mokosh that protects the home. There are also charms which protect chicken coops, and that clicks with me since we used to raise them. And here is also the iron ore that I keep on my working desk that I sort of fidget with while I work. And iron can embody any of the fiery protective gods, but especially Perun. The ancients weren't all craftspeople, and we know plenty of artifacts which seem to be made by amateur artists, so don't feel adverse to making something on your own, even if it's amateur. Even 1500 years ago, people weren't great at a skill until they did it over and over and improved. Likewise, I encourage using things with a personal sentimental value. For a long time, we've represented Mokosh on our altar using a cutting board that our mom made for her mom, like 40 years ago. And of course, those two mothers are responsible for my ultimate arrival to Slavic folk religion, so it really personally embodies the chain of mothers to us, so it's perfect for us to use in embodying her domain, so she can step into it as part of her domain. I've seen others use sewing needles or thread spinners or even sewing machines for her. Generally, you can offer anything that's within a deity's domain for them to use as their icon. And also feel free to dedicate pre-existing art as deity depictions. Like here we represent the goddess of fire with a folk art doll from our great-aunt's old art collection. Just be careful when selecting pre-existing artwork to use. Pre-existing art will likely have a small sort of spirit all on its own, and you want to make sure you select one that won't disagree with or resist work in that polytheist context. Lastly, if you can afford it, quite a few fellow Slavic polytheists also make their own idols and sell them online. This idol was carved by an artist from Ukraine, who we'll link below, just to give people a starting point for looking at this type of art. Artists will sell both more historical art styles like this, but also a good variety of alternative styles. There's all sorts of artists like this that you can find online, so we're gonna show a few artists that either we have bought from or that people we know have bought from. None of these are sponsors or anything. Hopefully this can serve as a place to start, to then branch out and try to find more that you specifically would like to use. There's all sorts of art out there, and it's really most effective if you select one that personally speaks to you, so that you can focus your spiritual work on that most directly. You will also need a few ritual tools, but these are less specific than some polytheist blogs might imply. There isn't any sort of necessity to having a work tool that is endowed with magical symbols. You just only need some type of blade convenient for you to use. So traditionally, this blade would either be an axe or a knife, which can be decorated with those symbols of power, but they'll do whatever they need to do without any of that. What's most important is a good metal. Iron is ideal. You can also use stainless steel, probably titanium. Anything that is a high purity and high quality will work. And along with your tools and your worship space, the last thing you'll really need are things which you will end up offering. Offerings don't need to be anything big or complicated, and we'll discuss them more in a bit, but if you're looking at materials you need, just remember you need something for offerings. The secured space. We consider it very important to secure the room which your idols reside in. All through your house and in the world beyond, there are little mischievous spirits who like to come and go and play tricks. And likewise, the household spirits don't really need full access to the idols of gods. Think of it as like keeping cats out of places that they don't belong, so they don't knock anything valuable or fragile over. These little spirits aren't evil, but they are very impulsive and unpredictable, so we'll need to keep them out of the place where we keep larger idols. Firstly, and probably most importantly, you need to secure the door to the room with your idols in it. Most easily, you can make a rosetta, golovrot, any of the fiery protective symbols, and put it over the door on the frame to secure the threshold. You can also put more on the door itself, but if you're trying to be a more subtle polytheist, and if putting a rosetta over your door is too obvious, I suggest putting the rosetta on the inside doorknob, or hanging one from the doorknob. So obviously when little grabby hands try to open the door, they will be repelled. Then above the door, inside the room, I suggest positioning a metal tool or a piece of metal ore. Just be aware that this metal will keep any spirits from passing it, including benevolent house spirits and ancestor spirits. So if you want to let those into your room, you need to take the metal down while you do that. Then traditionally, the outside walls around your windows would be given protective symbols, but that might not be an option for a lot of people, so alternatively, you can hang protective necklaces or charms on the middle of the window pane, where the window latches. Here I currently have a little Wada necklace, and you can keep metal above the window like you can above the door, with the same warning to take the metal down if you want to invite benevolent spirits inside your room. Now the iron will absolutely not interfere with any deities, but it will interfere with the demons or minor spirits who are a part of Vobos' domain. So if you do Praxis with Vobos, I imagine you might want to take the iron down, just as a gesture of respect that you trust him to bring his demons in your room or not bring them in the room when he's in there, Moving on to altars themselves. At least to our stem of the faith, the altar is really the heart of your praxis, since this is the space where you can address the gods and spirits face to face. The gods can choose to inhabit their depictions atop the altar, and once you dedicate the idol, it becomes part of their domain, and so in a broad sense they become part of the deity's body. Any part of a deity's domain is basically part of their body, so there is a significance to dedicating something to be the representation of the divinity, even when the deity is not specifically currently fully present within the idol, as during prayers. And given all of this importance of the idol which is dedicated to the deity, that becomes part of their body, that they can inhabit, it is very important to handle them correctly and carefully. The altar's space, discerned on our altar with a red thread around the threshold of the tabletop, is bound by taboos and regulations. Most important is the positioning of your altar, as it belongs in a room which you both feel at home in and are productive within, such as the kitchen or, in my case, the corner of my office space. Our local taboo dictates that altars belong in the southeastern corner of the room. East is most important, and then south can be negotiated. This wards away the whistling, wicked northern wind, and it ushers the sun's rise while enjoying basking in the sunset. And this will vary by region. I think some Mazovians favor the northeast corner instead, and I think some Ukrainians favor the south. You'll need to find someone from the specific region that you're interested in to give the specific taboo that you need to adhere to. Our altar follows a very popular form from Polish altars, which draws extra attention to the world above. In folk Catholicism, this is usually to venerate Mary the Undying and her deathless ascension to heaven, while other saints, and even more terrestrial forms of Mary, like the Mary of Thunder, will often go around on the table that represents the middle world, our Earth. This same form and function also apply to the BOGOWIE, with the world above represented by the largest portraits higher up on the wall, the middle world as smaller portraits near the tabletop, and as the icons all along the tabletop, and then the world below goes on a shelf just below the tabletop. But I won't be showing my depiction representation of the world below, since it's filled with portraits of family members passed away, so it's very personal. But other than that, so my altar can serve as an example, we'll take a nice close look. But remember, this is a very Polish rendition of the altar. In the other Slavic regions, do the structure, the ratio between top, middle, and bottom a little differently, and we'll touch on those after we look at my idol. So, at the top of our altar, the world above is represented by icons of Lords Perun, Svarog, who is in the act of forging the sun, and the fire goddess, who we choose to represent with a lovely art of Tabiti, the Scythian primordial fire goddess. Don't worry about it, personal praxis. Next, one of the main functions of your altar will be deflecting the malevolent cursing glare. This is also why the altar was often in clear view from the front door. Any cursing eyes would look upon the gods before any people, and the glory of the gods would burn off the curses of the cursing eye. So don't be afraid, you are actively encouraged to make a very extravagant and beautiful decorative altar, and on ours we've yoinked a symbol from one branch of our family to help with this symbolism, but you don't need to use this symbol. The complete altar comes together in the task of deflecting the cursing eye. Given the complexity, multifaceted nature of the gods, we like to represent them both through nature and in humanized types. So Mokosh, Wada, Marona, Zhevona, and Złoty are all represented by icons of animals and flowers, and then below the animal icons are their statues. Then the cutting board is for Mokosh. There are statues of Wada and Lelia, and 2 dolls for Wada and Wadom's union, and then the fiery goddess is on top of this jewelry box in the middle, and then there's a statue of Zhevona, a statue of Perun, then antlers for Złoty, and a homemade statuette for Artampasa, another Scythian deity who we've adopted into our praxis. Don't worry about that. And all of these gods have spaces to burn candles for them specifically. You'll find the same few fundamental components slightly repositioned in most of the popular Slavic altars. In the Carpathians, it's more common to place all the holy space high up on top shelves, but the sections of wall are still positioned to embody 3 aspects of the world. In the east, most altars are elevated in the corner, but often they also spill onto the table that's below them. So the corner of the table is used for offerings to the icons kept on the wall. So the entire corner of the house, the physical corner of the building, sort of becomes a big altar. Again, here you'll see the threshold is often distinguished by blessed white and red cloths, and there are often several shelves which represent the 3 worlds. It's also possible to offer or pray without any idols or icons or natural embodiments of the gods or even any jewelry. It's more about giving the icons a way of making their deity feel at home. You're just making it easier for them to step inside of your home. You're giving them shoes to slip into, you know. In my experience, and the experience of many, it's simply a bit more awkward to pray without a vessel for the deity. It usually results like the communication feels further away, almost like using a bad signal on the phone. Moving on to a couple more examples. In the last 50-ish years, it's become very popular to make a miniature altar under the TV. You spend a lot of time gazing at the TV, and so regardless of where in a room the TV is placed, it's a good idea to put in little idol beneath it to kind of counteract a lot of stuff you might be seeing on TV that's kind of an anti-blessing, you know. Likewise, for an example of a bit of a more minimalist altar, my mother keeps her altar in the kitchen, just above the sink. It's a lot more bare bones than mine, but it's also perfectly functional, and a more minimalist or bare bones altar in the kitchen, while there's a more extravagant one in the living room for the full family, is not at all uncommon. And you do not need a community temple, a big temple for your personal praxis, or even your family-level praxis. They were built for the festivals and the big celebrations between the entire community, and if you don't have a full community of polytheists, then there is no need for something like that. There is strong sense of proportionality. The gods do not expect a single person or even a single household to construct a giant temple for them. Main space conduct and taboo. Most taboos and rules are pretty simple since they extend from cultural hospitality and respect, which we've introduced before. So when you pray to the gods, you're inviting them to inhabit your representations of them, so keep their representations clean and in good shape. And likewise, when you approach the gods, just make sure to wash your hands, tidy your hair, wear a clean shirt, because you're asking the gods to be guests, and it's not good hospitality to greet guests while you're an absolute off-putting mess. You also want to prevent placing anything on the altar space which might carry a little tricky spirit, or other souls in general. You shouldn't place an urn onto your altar. And this is why the legates hold the taboos about blood in the altar space. You never get blood in the threshold, or blood-eating demons will be attracted to it. And the blood of an animal might linger around the sacred space and cause problems. These lingering angry spirits might disrespect the vessels intended for the gods. And likewise, I wouldn't suggest putting a freshly dead or taxidermied animal on the altar space. If you offer parts of animals, they'll need to be cleaned and processed, things like cooked meat, and the animal they came from should be properly laid to rest and then disposed of according to the codes of respect. You should butcher the food respectfully, you should handle the meat respectfully, and if it is treated properly, then it is a proper offering for the gods. This is also why I generally wouldn't recommend offering something like American mass-produced processed pig, because animals like pigs are treated absolutely horribly. They are not given the proper rights, they are not shown the proper respect, and they are a recipe for a very angry spirit. While animal and human sacrifices were absolutely done in the past, they were usually done away from the altar space at a secondary site, like the town square or another sacred lake or grove which is designed for committing death. Obviously, please don't kill animals just for offering. You need to use the meat properly and not disrespect the life of the food giver. For the love of the gods, do not kill an animal on your altar, please don't. And along the way, if mistakes were made, then either an idol could become occupied by mischievous spirits, or if the idol was especially disrespected, then the soul of the wood or the material that the idol is made of could turn against the owner. This often led to punishing the misbehaving idol. In Poland, we tended to smear mud or soot on their faces and verbally chewed them out until the demons were humiliated and left. In Czechia, they would cut and disfigure the idols. And in the East, they might be drug around and beaten in a big display to basically humiliate the statue. But nowadays, if you feel your icons are rejecting the gods, if something's gone wrong, then I would suggest just putting those icons away and replacing them with new ones. And while most taboo in praying itself is very regional and quickly delves into its own rabbit holes, there are just a few near-universal taboos that I need to ingrain as quickly and firmly as possible. Never pray to or call upon the sun or directly solar deities within the night. You never pray to or call upon the moon when he is almost totally new. Even the gods need to rest, and disrupting their sleep is not good. To a lesser degree, while they won't be angered by the contact, don't be surprised if the summertime or solar deities feel distant or difficult to reach during the winter. Their power is just lower. So if you need protection in the winter, then consider praying to someone with a stronger foothold in the world, like Żelona or Mokosh, instead of relying on the strained or distant Svarog or Perun. It's good to coordinate your praxis accordingly and make contact with several of the gods to round out a very holistic and complete series of relationships. Some jewelry and religious attire. In approaching the gods, we don't exactly hold the taboos in clothing and presentation which other religions do. There's no ritual dirtiness requiring purified clothing or veils in the way Greeks have miasma or the sanctity of soul impurity which guide so many Jewish customs. We just have common sense physical cleanliness. There are very loose decency rules in what you should wear when you approach the gods, and that is just what you would wear out in public. So for examples, if it's not appropriate where you live to go around public topless, then it won't be appropriate to approach your household altar topless. The gods are ancient and are not bound by human bodies. They care first and foremost about the principle of respect being shown. The important part is that you're making the gesture of adhering to your societal norms. The specifics of norms always varied between Slavic villages, and the gods always adjusted for the regional expectations, and today is no different than the past. Beyond restrictions, it's very common for people to wear clothing imbued with magical symbols, especially embroidery or jewelry. This type of clothing, decoration with magical symbols, is not about the god's end, but about the worshipper's end. One of the most frequent questions we get is whether something, especially in terms of clothing, jewelry, symbolism, is historically genuine or some kind of new age mumbo-jumbo. So in this segment, we will not rule out things. We will not assert that other symbols are fake. We will just give a list of shapes that we personally can verify. So let's briefly look at some of those. Most famously and commonly, especially near the Carpathians, is the Rosetta, which we have discussed before. It's a fiery and solar symbol of protection, and it has a very common variant, the thunder mark, which is put on buildings to keep them from being struck by lightning. The Rosetta probably belongs to the fiery goddess. Placing it on a building is an insurance to Perun that there are no demons inside, and he will therefore not attack the building. And likewise, the symbol will scare away the demons because they burn in the fire of the sun goddess. In your symbolism, it's very common to wear symbols that represent the four magical elements in Slavic cosmology and theology: fire, earth, water, air. And we'll begin with fire, which has quite a few symbols to choose from. Now, historically, the most broad and common symbol to represent fire was the swastika, but that's not something that a lot of people are comfortable using nowadays, so there are alternatives. While this star can represent specifically the sun, it's also broadly a stellar symbol and can just represent fire, because stars are fiery and the atmosphere is fiery. They are the fieriness above, and this is embodied within the symbol. Likewise, while it's not explicitly solar, the hands of God are representative of Father Svarog, who is the god of the primordial atmospheric fire. You can sort of think of it as that Egyptian god who's shown as a sun disk with a bunch of hands reaching down. The hands of God are the hands of Svarog coming down from the sky. And the last symbol that's easily applicable for fire is the Kolovrot. It's representative of fiery things and also sequences and cycles, specifically paying attention to stages of a cycle. The name Kolovrot applies to electrical current cycles, and it represents the lifespan and life cycles of fire. I think the previous symbols are more specific, and the Kolovrot might be a little non-specific for elemental fire. Moving on, there is elemental earth, which is represented by a diamond shape or a tilted square. Very often this is represented nowadays by a series of 4 of the embroidery stones, which sort of represent the 4 directions, and so the entirety of Earth. And so this is a depiction of Earth and the Earth Mother Mokosh. But the embroidered Earth could often appear as a sort of half diamond or half square because it is the Earth emerging on the top of the ground and is the bottom of greater motifs. And likewise, Mother Earth is also often shown in embroidery as one of these earth diamonds, which is turning into the dress of a woman. If you ever see a woman with this general head shape, this floral crown is very often shown on embroidery of Mokosh. She is wearing this as basically the Queen Mother. So it's very likely that if you see a woman with birds or a woman in other contexts who has this specific headdress, it is probably Mokosh. Then there is elemental air, and elemental air is very often represented by depictions of birds in flight, which will usually look something like this. A footnote that this particular symbol is a genuine depiction of a bird in embroidery, but it also happens to look like a symbol that Nazis used, so yes, this is a symbol that Nazis use, but yes, it's also genuine from history, and if you see an old shirt with it, that is probably actually genuine. And if you aren't feeling like a bird to represent the winds, this symbol is also very common, and I can't tell you exactly what it's supposed to be. It seems to vary region by region what it's actually a literal depiction of, but it represents the winds. Somewhat similarly is a symbol that looks like a diamond with a bunch of lines through it, and this represents thunder and thunderstorms. This one is also less literal, but very frequently evokes the summer and the summer storm. And lastly, there is a series of symbols that represents the air and the water that are very similar to each other and can kind of interchange with each other depending on region. This series of wavy or overlapping lines that represent air currents or the waves of water are elemental air and elemental water, and are usually on the tops and bottoms of embroidery scenes. So now let's take a look at some examples from my own wardrobe to kind of see how this works. If we look at the main bar on this sleeve, the middle is decorated by the symbol of the earth, with the four directions as the four diamonds, and then the smaller diamonds, which are sort of the upper earth, the hills. And the hills, upper earth, go to the water and or air, probably air, represented by these black zigzag lines. And then above these are the stars in red at the outer border. So this is a representative depiction of the middle world going to the upper world, of the skies meeting the earth with both the upper and lower horizon. This shirt is an incredibly atmospheric composition all throughout it. If we look at the very top of the sleeves at the shoulders, these little triangles of squares are atmospheric symbols, your little birds in flight, and these bars right below them are also symbols of the wind and the atmosphere, and the wind trails along the full length of the sleeves, around the collarbones, and around the back of the shirt. This is a very ideal, perfect shirt if you want something atmospheric. I wonder why I own this. Going below, we can look at the main sleeve motif, and on the bottom is a much more simplified and abstract version of the Mother Earth. Her bottom, the skirt there, is evoking the earth symbols below it, showing that she is the earth, and she has a very simplified floral crown above her, with two birds on her shoulders. And right above her are the main big designs. You could reasonably interpret that they are meant to be maybe the sun or flowers, but they are the atmospheric symbols, and you can tell that these are the atmospheric symbols specifically, not necessarily from their composition on the sleeve, but from along the center of the shirt here, carrying down from the wind of the collar. The collar bleeds into this repeating pattern of the atmospheric symbol, interchanged with a somewhat more bird-like wind pattern. It's all atmosphere descending from the wind, so the entire shirt is a very atmospheric composition. And moving to this last shirt, in contrast, this is an incredibly earthen shirt all around. Of course, here are depictions of the earth in the four directions, and of course with flowers growing from the earth. And then these flowers below the earth are surrounded by this version of glovrot, or spinning shape, which is not immediately clear in this instance, but it does represent the seasons, or the moving of the earth, of the life force, the cycles of the earth, as the earth moves through the seasons, as the water moves through the earth, as the life moves through the earth, it has its stages and is embodied through this. And moving below these flowers, you can see the flowers are growing from this big depiction of a kolovorot, broken up into four sections. So each of these sections could be thought of as seasons, and the seasons are broken up into not necessarily literal months, but absolutely symbolic months. just the life force of the earth as it grows, changes, is reborn, and is embodied in this shape. And again, of course, this type of klovrot can mean many different things, but we are clued into its earthen meaning by the pattern on the bottom of the sleeve around the collars, which is the earth. The entire composition of the shirt works together. Moving on from the elements for just a few more, there's also a lot of wreaths in embroidery, and different wreaths are made out of different things, but this is the wheat wreath. And this wheat wreath is probably representative, or very often representative, of Yarilo, and the life cycle of wheat, the harvest, evocative of the seasons, and is a good symbol for health, abundance, that sort of domain. And another version of this wreath has a lot of variants, but nowadays people have kind of taken an effort to standardize it, and it is a fair and reasonable desire to try to standardize a symbol. All of these wreaths are representative of the bridal wreath, or the floral wreath that young girls float down the river to find the men that they are destined to marry. It is a symbol of women, and it is often used for wada. There is also a symbol that is conceptually similar to those of wind, but is more about movement. It's difficult to explain, but it's a shape that appears repeated in chains, similar to the water, earth, and air in full pictures, and it often evokes the movement of animals that are within the picture. If there is a deer above it, then it represents the deer running, and it's sometimes stylized into a full picture that looks like a bow and arrow, and a lot of people use it to specifically evoke there's no specific picture where there's a huntress woman with a bow and arrow who points at this and there's a caption that says, "This is my symbol," but it's a reasonable interpretation. And similar to this is the quadruple cross, which is often in contexts of water and of, also hard to put into words, but I guess the presence of magic in a scene. It would often appear to sort of evoke or reference or embody the feelings of demonesses, things like the Rusalki, and much like with the symbol for Jevonna, many people associate this symbol with Marjonna, and that's never stated anywhere, but is also a very reasonable association. And lastly, for our symbol section, while I'm not aware of this having any historical or a traditional presence, I think, as far as I can find, it was invented within the last 100 or 200 years. This symbol has been dubbed the symbol of Volos, and while it doesn't have historical presence, there is also nothing wrong with it. It doesn't have a troublesome origin, and through use in praxis it seems to be responded to well. It seems like it works. Prayer mechanisms. In sharing spaces with Hellenists and heathens and Hindus, I've come to learn there's a very wide variety of reasons why people think they ought to pray, and a wide variety of what exactly people think prayers are and what they do. For an extreme example, the Aztecs thought that they needed to sacrifice offerings to the sun god, or else he'd lose his battle against the moon and would be killed and consumed, and then the world would end. And near the other end, Greek gods wouldn't need anything from humanity, but they still liked offerings and got involved with human subjects because they basically wanted to and liked to. With these sort of two extremes in mind, we can find the general Slavic conception of the role of prayer and praxis. The Slavs did not believe that the gods needed praxis with humanity to sustain the universe or anything like that. But praxis was an extension of hospitality, the same larger hospitality between all living things. There's a certain obligatory type of hospitality between nature and animals and people that intertangle them, and if this hospitality is violated, then the entire web collapses. So there is a level of obligatory coexistence and minimal respect that needs to be maintained between people and the divine, but this is not necessarily worship, it's coexistence. The actual worship, the offerings and veneration, is something that not everybody needs to do, but it's believed that if someone does seek out that type of communication, especially if they reside within the domains of the BOGOWIE, that this communication will greatly benefit the fortunes of a person. For example, it's generally believed that if a hunter dedicates their life to hunting, if they follow the rules of a good ethical hunter and also seek out a relationship with a hunting deity like Jevonna, that both adhering to the sort of hospitality in maintaining the rules of a hunter and embracing actual direct worship with Jevonna will increase their fortunes or favors in the domain of hunting. The existing within domain here is rather important. In certain online spaces especially, I see a lot of Western polytheists use the phrase patron or matron in a very loose way, if it is basically their favorite, if it's a deity that is especially cool to them in a sort of more abstract sense. But in the Slavic understanding, a patron is very literal, and the patron or matron deity is the deity in which you work. If you work in a deity's domain, they are your patron. The hunter's patron is Zhevona, the mother's patron is Molkosh. Now, of course, you can have several patrons, or you can have no patrons at all. So reaching out to the gods is something historically seen as optional but greatly beneficial to people if it is pursued. Of course, historically people would reach out to the gods for big things and small things. People had household altars all throughout history, they wore pendants representing the gods all throughout history. If you want to reach out to the gods simply for protection, if you want to make a relationship regarding Perun where he is just a protector, where all you really do is ask Perun to protect you, and you give him some offering and prayer in return, that is a totally fair, historically accurate, and completely effective route of worship that's been done for at least 1500 years. Or if you want to make a deity your explicit patron and have a deeper relationship with more devotional offerings to them and more commitment to them, that is also very old and very fair. There are different types of relationships between people, and there are different types and degrees of relationships between people and divinities. I do want to address a specific concept that I see shared around a lot in, I guess, the online English-speaking Slavic polytheist space. So historically, there were big offerings, big festivals, big community prayers, and there were minor offerings and minor prayers within the home. We have the archaeological evidence of both. They were both a thing. There are some people who will say online that only the larger community offerings are important and that the gods didn't pay attention to or did not care about household offerings, and it seems to me that this probably arises from a type of defense mechanism, that certain people want to limit newcomers to the religion, and the easiest way to do that is to imply that you need a big community, so now it's, you need to know someone in the religion to be brought into it. But limiting joining with that kind of thing isn't actually going to do that, it's just going to create little social cliques. So just to reiterate it and to make it very clear, you probably won't be able to do the big community rituals, and that's why I'm not really going into them in this video, but that's entirely fine, because you don't need to. They were intended for benefiting the community as a whole. You can just do the household rituals, and that's fine. And the rituals and prayers done with the BOGOWIE are seen as a situation of mutual beneficence. The gods do not need our worship, but both the gods and people benefit from instances of worship. The deities are just as social of beings as humans are. They enjoy social interaction and enjoy partaking in things like the magic of song, the magic of discussion, the magic of word itself. They enjoy the comfort of the fires just as we do. They enjoy the smell and taste of wonderful food just as we do, even if they don't need to eat it the way we do. And so the mechanism of prayer is basically the mechanism of mutual communal gift-giving. Just as neighbors will continually give gifts to each other, one to the other to the other, so people and the divine interact. Today you give Perun a prayer, and tomorrow Perun gives you fortune, and the next day you give Perun a prayer, and there is no beginning or end. There is no true debt, and there is no true end. It is the giving for the sake of giving, for the sake of relationship, community, hospitality. And, of course, the other end of this, it should be made clear that Slavic theology believes that the gods are there, whether they are believed in and worshipped or not. Indeed, the thunderstorm is Perun. The winds, the clouds are part of Perun's body, and Perun will do his thing whether you worship him or not. And if you worship him, he might increase your favor, he might, put in extra effort to watch out for you and to aid you, but if you don't, he's not going to smite you, he's not going to punish you for not believing or worshiping, but he's not going to put in special effort to make sure he doesn't roll over you, You can really think of it as making yourself a neighbor to the gods through some level of worship, or making yourself, akin to the gods, working within their body, within their essence, or you can remain a stranger to them, and then only the loosest rules of hospitality regarding strangers remains, not the rules regarding community. So if you've heard all this and think that you would like to begin Praxis, you would like to reach out to these deities and try to make a contact and begin a relationship with them, let's explore a few simple ways to try to do that. Historically, the approach would probably be to watch for omens and then consult with a seer to advise you on the meaning of the omens, but we're gonna try to come up with ways that people can do all on their own without needing anyone to reference. And really, for the very beginning, getting into it, I would recommend the divination method of your comfort. It can really be anything, because all divination uses the same fundamental logic. Every form of divination is just the divine manipulating random chance to cause a specific outcome. If you're wanting to reach out to the BOGOWIE for the first time, I recommend beginning by setting your divinatory method of your choice at the ready, and then making a offering to the divine. In your very first prayer, just making contact. It doesn't need to be anything special. I just recommend trying to politely get their attention. It can be something as simple as, "Hello, Sir Perun. I have never reached out to you, but Perun, if you hear me, hello, I am reaching to you. I would like to ask if you would like to communicate," essentially. And as you do this sort of prayer, you make the offering to them. A good beginning choice for an offering like this is to burn away a candle for them, or burn away incense for them, or maybe initially burning a bit of food, like a piece of bread for them, something like that. The basic reasoning for this is these deities are very big and very widespread and are not omnipresent. They do not see everything, so you will need to get their attention, and you should do it respectfully. So do not demand their presence, and don't be upset or concerned if you don't feel anyone respond on the first time, because, again, these deities are not omnipresent. So you make the simple prayer and burn the offering in hopes of getting their attention, and then you turn to the divination method of your choice. And then, say if you're using a tarot deck, just going through the tarot deck and verbalizing, I am going to shuffle this deck, and I'm going to draw 5 cards, and I would ask you, please, Perun, to indicate whether you are communicating to me, and whether you would like me to pursue any affiliation with you. By just causing some cards to come up as a shuffle, that would indicate that. And then if there is not anything immediately obvious about the cards, but that you think would be important, it would also be useful to verbalize that. For a very random example, if you happen to associate the King of Wands with Perun, then you might want to verbalize that. And then, if the King of Wands turns up, that's a much stronger sign than others would have been. I do suggest to only read a no if you feel you've read a blunt no. The thing is that the BOGOWIE are very blunt and direct in proper Slavic fashion. If they, for some reason, want to decline any communication, connection, if they do not think that it is proper, they will, in the experience of most, make that known, and they will be blunt. Likewise, on this topic, if you're worried if you do something wrong that upsets them, if it isn't violating hospitality and it isn't directly breaking their domain, for example, if you are not a hunter who is abusing and mistreating and wasting the meat of animals, then it's a safe bet that if you do something that upsets the deity, that there will be a blunt omen that makes it obvious. The Slavic gods are not coy. There's a certain trait of the Slavic gods that's very well observed, but not always well explained in English-speaking spaces, which is that the gods are not as chatty or friendly or person-like or personable as in other religions. I hear it described that Thor can feel like someone's uncle, that Dionysus or Hermes coming in feels like a familiar old friend, that those gods can feel like people. And that is very often not the case for the Slavic gods, but you can still feel them. I often hear them described as distant, but I think that can be a misnomer. That isn't a great translation. I would say that they are less person-like, that dealing with them feels more like feeling the presence of a less humanish animal. Now, if you live somewhere with or have been around cows, deer, goats, horses, you know that these are intelligent animals that have very strong and clear-cut personalities, that these animals can communicate their inner selves, that can make the nature of their souls known, but that they do not feel like people. They feel like individuals, and they are themselves, and they are not people, and the same is true for the BOGOWIE. So therefore, if you're looking for confirmation that you're communicating with these deities, you should not be looking for the same type of humanish feeling that a lot of other religions will look for. It's very hard to put into words, but you will feel them if you feel them. You will know if they are there. For example, when Perun made himself very near to me, he did not feel like a person being near. He felt to the soul. It felt like the charge of electricity, thunder, the heaviness in the air right before lightning strikes somewhere. You know the heaviness and the movement, the weight of the air when it happens. And in the same way that felt physically, the presence of Perun felt to the soul. Not at all like a person, but very present, real, and comforting in its own different way. It's a very similar feeling to when a minor spirit, such as a demon, is nearby, but of course just much bigger and much more distinct. So if you have experiences with minor spirits, such as ghosts, then you'll probably be used to the non-physical nature of that kind of feeling. I'm saying physical. I guess it might be more accurate to say tangible. Your body can feel it, but they are not a solid, is all I'm trying to say. Enough trying to say this in English, I'm going to move on. Making an offering. A lot of communication with the BOGOWIE will consist of small routine prayers. Simply the burning of candles or incense while you make a small prayer of basically thanksgiving, and not asking for anything big, just thanking for ongoing communication. But if the time or occasion comes where you need to ask the divinity for help with anything, or for a specific thing, especially a bigger thing, then it's appropriate to make a bigger offering for them. In some cases, it is appropriate to make food for the divinity, and then to basically let the food cool off, and let the deity enjoy the smell of the food and the essence of the soul of the food, basically, as it cooks and as it cools off. And then after a point, if it's not a big occasion, it is fair for you to eat the food yourself. Or in other occasions, the food will be left for the divinity. Basically, you can leave food outside, and whatever happens to it, and is the will of the divinity. When you leave food for them, it's very customary to leave it on the altar for a few days, or however long is appropriate, and then leave it outside. Whether you eat it or leave it is often clarified by holidays for context, but for the situation of a beginner, I recommend leaving it until you start to get the indication or experience to feel that it is okay to eat. Better to be safe. Specifically in the case of drinks, it is very customary to just pour the drink and then leave it on the altar to evaporate, and the evaporation of the drink is it being taken and consumed by the divinity. But in the cases where you really want to give a gift to the divine, probably because you're making a bigger ask of them, then it's the custom to make a fire and burn an offering. And of course, the Slavs all throughout history were always pragmatic and practical people, and I do not recommend tackling this in an aesthetic way or a visually pleasing way. You should make a fire, and you should make a good fire. This is a countryside fire pit. A lot of our firewood is scrap wood. So in making your offering fire, you really have two options, and you need to identify which you're taking. You can make a small fire that will burn out in a few minutes, and basically just the fire is the offering in that case. And basically the life, the souls of the plants and of the wood that is in the fire has value on its own. That is life that you are burning. And the fire itself has a soul. The fire is alive, so that can be a small offering on its own. But if you're going to be offering food, then I recommend making a big, robust fire. I highly recommend not making the fire using a fire starter like kerosene or gasoline. The deity is sort of consuming the fire, and you want to make it a nice fire that you enjoy. You want to enjoy the smell. You want to enjoy the texture of the wood. You want to enjoy the food that you offer in it, and the fire is a gift, so make the gift a nice thing. And if you're not used to making fires from scratch, it's pretty simple. You only need a very flammable, soft inner tinder, and you'll want to arrange that tinder in a sort of inner layer nest. And this little highly flammable inner nest will then be surrounded by a middle layer of smaller twigs and ideally dry bark, papery bark, super dried out planks of wood, anything that is very, very dry but bigger than the tinder. So the initial fire will catch on the tinder, and then it'll get hot enough to catch to the middle drier material, and then around the middle material you use the big pieces of wood, and the big pieces of wood shield the fire from the winds. And eventually, once the fire gets hot enough from consuming the middle material, it'll start eating into the outer material. And once it starts eating into the outer material, it will be self-sufficient enough to be able to eat it without being snuffed out by the wind. Firstly, before you start the fire, it's customary for us to sort of secure the threshold of the ritual space, like you would the threshold of the altar. And assuming you aren't in a place that's riddled with demons, this can be a very simple procedure. Here I just sprinkle a pre-prepared sort of, you could call it a potion. Water that's been blessed and infused with vodka and a few bits of plants. And this is sprinkled over the side of the fire, basically to, start the appetite of the fire, like having a drink before you eat. And it's appropriate to wave around some iron or a protective pendant or something to just make sure there are no demons lingering in the fire pit or directly around. Especially on a windy, cold day like this, I like to start my fires by lighting them inside within a jar. I'll carry the jar outside, sheltered from the wind by my body, and then I'll carefully lower it into the fire pit. It's also a very useful maneuver to light a bit of scrap cloth, such as an old mitten or something on fire. The mitten is a very, very good kindling that's not likely to be blown out by the wind as easily as something like leaves. And again, when I make these fires, in addition to using the firewood and the wild grasses, I like to give a few wild berries, a few wild flowers, a few nice things, because again, the fire is a gift. These little things are gifts to the fire itself, because the fire is a living thing. So there are all the souls and all the life forces of the plants, and then they give to the life force of the fire. And then, of course, as the fire grows, you can feel it change the direction of the wind. The fire becomes a big, strong force that starts to basically shape the world around it and intertangle with pre-existing domains, and that is the fire that you want. This is fire that's grown to maturity, so like allowing an animal to grow for the best cut of meat, this is the best cut of fire. And from the practical viewpoint, this fire is also burning much hotter than the younger fire, so it will more easily burn things that you give it as offering. And generally, while I do this, I typically start by making a small prayer as I'm lighting the fire, just for the fire itself as its own thing. And then once the fire has reached maturity, I then begin the big prayer to the deity that I'm making the offering for. And typically most prayers are from folk songs, or literally are folk songs. If you're looking for a prayer to Slavic deities, the best place to look is folk songs. I'll include, probably either on screen or in the description, a couple prayers that I'm particularly fond of, some of them instead written by other polytheists. But of course all of these are in Slavic languages, and if you don't speak a Slavic language at all, I would encourage you to try to learn one. We do believe that words have souls in them, that the spoken word is alive just as the fire is alive, and the spoken word has a magic to it. Therefore, there is a magic to saying the prayers in the proper language that is not present when you translate the prayers. Prayers made in English will still be received. The gods are not limited by language in that way. A prayer made in English is still a prayer, and it will still be good. It'll still function as a prayer. But ideally, you'll want to work towards being able to make those prayers in a Slavic language. And once the fire is mature and burning and the prayer has been made, I also recommend just basking in the fire and enjoying it. It's also sort of just part of respecting the fire to enjoy its warmth. I've been really conflicted in scripting this video because there's a lot that I want to cover, but there are two issues. One being that since this is all familiar to me, I'm not sure how much detail I do or don't need to go into, so I'm very worried about either over-explaining or under-explaining. Connected to that, I'm also not always sure what I need to explain because a lot of things are so familiar to me that I think they go without saying, but other people don't know about them, and I don't know until we get there. here. The other issue, I don't want this video to be as long as the deity video essays. I don't want every video I make to be that in-depth. This is meant to be a more practical guide, so I don't want it to be overwhelming with an onslaught of 2 hours of information. So while I had first intended to discuss divination methods that are traditional, to discuss the major holidays that are celebrated in Slavic polytheism, I think that this video is already becoming pretty dense. So I hope you don't mind if I cut this video off here, and then I'll address divination methods in the next video, and then major holidays in the video after that. And if there are other topics that need clarifying, again, please leave a comment. This is a very new kind of video for me. I'm going out on a limb with this, so thanks for your patience. Please leave comments, so let me know how I can improve this. I want this to be a good resource, but it's just hard to know what people don't know. But thank you, and I hope you have a very blessed day.